and get into this match to see what these players can do here.
All right, let's get started with this match and see which Pokemon both trainers bring out. No surprise, it's going to be that Rotom Key and that Indeedee Sierra. We saw so much of this yesterday, so definitely, I think, the lead that we expected. Meanwhile, Grimmsnarl and Charizard here on the other side. That Grimmsnarl is going to, of course, be able to apply some early support with the Light Screen and the Reflect. But yeah, it's Rotom time again, and let's see if you can get a couple of nasty plots like you did yesterday. No Umbreon to deter it as much this time around.
Yeah, that Rotom paired next to the Indeedee is just so strong. No way to really get access to that Rotom to chip it down and just let it set up freely here. So it'll be interesting to see how Yoav responds. Is going to just swap out that Charizard though, bringing in that Incineroar, getting that Intimidate, which not relevant here at all. And then let's see what this DD goes for. Is just going to go for that standard follow me here. No surprises. We saw this so much yesterday. So I'm sure we can guess what this Rotom is about to do after this Grimmsnarl takes the opportunity to set up that Light Screen. And sure enough, that nasty plot.
There it is. The boosts start coming. The big question here is, and there's my answer actually, there is Snarl on this Incineroar. So hey, there's no Umbreon this time around, but there is a Snarl on the Incineroar, right? So you're effectively doing the same thing. So when we saw Alejandro play against Sun yesterday, and that Sun team had Umbreon, Umbreon just stayed on the field, kept clicking Snarl. Incineroar here definitely can whittle away at the Rotom as well. So once again, the idea I think for Yoav is to just get some damage onto Rotom, eliminate the Indeedee, then put Rotom in KO range so that Groudon can come in and just pick up a knockout onto it with something like a max Rockfall. So with that Light Screen and with the Snarls, this Rotom, it'll take a lot longer for it to actually get set up.
Rotom opting to just go for a Protect though. Indeedee as well with the Protect. Just scouting out to see what Yoav is bringing. Of course, that Grimmsnarl opting to try and go for that Spirit Break in the center of the Snarl as well. So Alejandro going into the next turn with full knowledge of what Yoav's trying to throw his way.
Yeah, and I think now you probably just want to go for another Follow Me, another nasty plot. The question is basically, is Alejandro willing to play this trade-off, and at what point do you decide, hey, I just want to start attacking? Yesterday, we saw that Alejandro kind of got into a pickle when he took too much damage, and actually, yeah, it's going to just be an Indeedee switch out here, wanting to apply some more pressure immediately. I love the Landorus switching here because Landorus just matches up so well into all of Yoav's team. It does so much damage, as well as getting the Intimidates off against Incineroar and Groudon. More importantly, when you max, you can just do so much damage. So I think that's a great time to just, push the go button immediately and switch out, because otherwise you might just take too much damage without getting anything in return.
Rotom opting to go for another nasty plot, not needing to hide behind the Indeedee's Follow Me here, as it gets a Spirit Break hit into it for a special attack drop, as well as a Snarl as well. But as you said, that Lander is hitting the field. Start putting off some pressure next to this Rotom here.
Yeah, so the combination of Snarl and Spirit Break actually just, brings Rotom to where it started the turn, hilariously enough. Now, no Reflect has been set up, and Yoav recognizes, hey, I probably should get it up just to have a lot of protection for the remainder of the match. Lander's here in a prime position to consider Dynamaxing, right? You could just go for a Dynamax, Max Quake onto the Incineroar, go for another nasty plot with a Rotom. And so there we are going to see the Dynamax, and I think that is the perfect time to actually get a max out, right? You got the Landers out in a perfect position. But this is where, once again, Grimmsnarl just provides so much utility with that Light Screen, with that Reflect. It's going to be really difficult for Alejandro to actually pick up knockouts turn after turn. And if you can stall out Alejandro's Dynamax, then, from Yoav's perspective, you can sweep with your late game Dynamax.
Certainly. Of course, that Reflect coming out here. And it's going to be down to the Landorus where it targets. Just going to go for a max Airstream here into the Incineroar, doing a decent little chunk of damage through this Reflect and just getting a speed boost onto both of his Pokemon here going forward. The Rotom as well is going to fire back with a Thunderbolt and does pick up that KO with the critical hit here. That Incineroar is going to go down.
Yeah, I want to say that Incineroar could have survived without the critical hit because, yes, Rotom is boosted up right now, but you also have Light Screen up, and that Incineroar has that Assault Vest. So Alejandro actually opting for that Max Airstream rather than Max Quake because the combination of Max Airstream and Thunderbolt gets guaranteed damage into anything, right? I suppose you could Max Quake and Thunderbolt as well, but then, you Groudon switching could be a little bit scary. That being said, at the end of the day, that's not what you want to see if you're Yoav. Yeah, definitely would have survived without the crit there, and, could have gotten an attack off, also can conserve the Incineroar for future Intimidate cycling. So Alejandro right now basically wants to make sure that he gets the most out of these next 2 turns of Dynamax from Landorus, and from Yoav's perspective, your goal is probably to just stall out this Dynamax and then try to sweep with Groudon in this late game.
That Max Quake coming out from the Landorus in the ground, picking up a really good chunk of damage as well, bringing it down. Another critical hit. Alejandro on an absolute roll here with his luck on his side. It does bring the Groudon down to berry range, but that's not the amount of damage you want to see on, like, for Yoav when after he's gone through all the efforts of setting up these screens.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, if there's one way you can get around the screens, it's just getting these critical hits. That being said, I think even if the critical hit didn't happen, Yoav made a little bit of a greedy play that turn, not going for something like a Protect, right? And he probably didn't want to go for a Protect because he was worried about Rotom going for something like a Nasty Plot. So, Alejandro's definitely gotten very fortunate with these critical hits. That being said, I think Yoav would have gotten fairly punished anyway, even without that critical hit, right? Even if Groudon survives the turn, you still take so much damage, and I'm not sure it's actually viable to Dynamax Groudon after eating up a Max Quake and an Overheat before you max. So now for Yoav, it's really down to this Charizard. You're definitely going to have to max it, but Charizard doesn't exactly have the best matchup into Rotom typically. This one, however, does have that Ancient Power, which turns into Max Rockfall. The downside, though, is if you go for Max Rockfall, you change the weather. You get rid of your own sun, and that means you do significantly less damage. And from right now, from Alejandro's perspective, you don't really have to worry about Grimmsnarl at all. That doesn't do anything after getting up the screen. Sure, it can Spirit Break a little bit to lower your special attack, but the name of the game is just knocking out Charizard at this point. And as we see, Yoav's going to spend a turn Max Guarding, so Charizard's only going to get 2 turns of Max to really work with. So his critical hit's definitely coming up huge for Alejandro to start off the game, but he's also been playing smartly.
Definitely like the Max Guard here, just to wait out the last turn of Max from Alejandro's side, not risking taking a huge rock fall from the Landorus, which is what Alejandro opted for on this turn. Rotom, though, just going for the Nasty Plot, covering the potential Max Guard here, and is just going to take the opportunity to set up further, which is definitely dangerous. That's the problem with protecting or playing passively against something like a Nasty Plot Rotom, is they can just start setting up and really punishing you for that.
Exactly, and that's partially maybe why Yoav was a little bit scared to go for a move with that Groudon last turn, go for a Protect. So, you've able to stall out the Dynamax, but you only have 2 turns of Dynamax left with the Charizard. Charizard's only way of beating the Rotom is through that Rock-type attack, and so the Landorus and the Rotom also have a speed boost, right? So you can just go for Rock Slide Thunderbolt right now onto the Charizard slot. There it is. That's a big chunk of damage to start off, and it'll probably survive. Yeah, it does survive, but at 3 HP is not enough to really close out this game, especially when you've got a solar power, turned off right now.
The Landorus and the Rotom doing so much damage, and that Airstream not really picking up too much damage in return. As you said, the solar power is just going to take it out. The Spirit Break from the Grimmsnarl, of course, not doing too much. There's been a lot of games where Grimmsnarl we've seen as the last Pokemon out on the field, and unfortunately Grimmsnarl, just being a support Pokemon, is not going to close out this game. So Charizard goes down, and this is surely going to be a 1-0 lead for Alejandro here.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing Yoav could have done in this game was actually just Dynamax the Groudon the turn he got hit by that Max Quake and that Overheat. Sure, you take a lot of damage, but you at least get a KO onto the Rotom with that Max Rockfall. And so I think the Dynamax just came out far too late in this game. Once again, very unfortunate to face 2 critical hits in a row.
This game 2 to see what adjustments are going to be made heading into this match 2. So we are going to see the Indeedee Rotom yet again. The infamous duo at this point coming out from Alejandro's side. Next to the Groudon to lead this time, next to that Grimmsnarl here.
I like the Groudon lead immediately, right? If you look at Yoav's team, there isn't that much damage output or ways to boost your damage output, but Groudon is the only Pokemon that can actually increase its stats via something like Swords Dance, right? And so, yeah, Rotom's looking a little bit scary right now, but Groudon does apply pressure with Swords Dance immediately. Yoav wants to play it safe turn 1, going for that Protect and Light Screen. Alejandro, could capitalize by just going for a Follow Me and a Nasty Plot to start off the game, but I do like the Groudon mix-up here just because it does apply a lot more pressure into Rotom, whereas nothing else on Yoav's team matches well into Indeedee plus Rotom as a duo.
Yeah, it's not a duo that we really get to see and utilize in a lot of the teams, but I mean, if you don't really have a reliable way to break it, it's definitely something that can just run away with the game. But Indeedee is just going to opt to swap out, just going straight into that Landorus to get Intimidate off on this Groudon, to just lower its attack so it's not threatening the Rotom as much here. course, that Protect coming out as well, so it just takes the attack drop with nothing else going for it. The Grimmsnarl take the opportunity to set up the light screen, and the Rotom does go for the nasty plot, so it does not need to be next to that Indeedee to get a boost, and is just opting to raise its special attack anyways.
So there's the Porygon in the back as well. I think Yoav definitely making some good Pokemon adjustments this time around. One reason that Yoav might have been afraid of Swords Dance turn 1 is because we've actually seen the Indeedee have Helping Hand. The sun is up already, so one play Alejandro could have made was just Helping Hand Max Flare into Groudon turn 1. And so Yoav wanted to cover for that option. However, Alejandro just goes for that nasty plot instead, and now Yoav definitely feels the pressure, wants to switch out that Groudon. Love the Incineroar switching here just because, you know, it will take any fire type attack really, really well here. And I think once again, Yoav's goal is to try to stall out Alejandro's Dynamax without losing too much, then play towards a Groudon sweep in this late game.
Not going to see the Dynamax come out this turn, though. The Grimmsnarl taking the opportunity to set up a Reflect as well. Landorus going for the U-turn instead, dealing a little bit of chip, but getting the opportunity to get that free switch on Alejandro's end here to bring that Indeedee back in, or the mysterious fourth Pokemon in the back.
And it is going to be that Indeedee coming out again. So my question here is, does Rotom go for another nasty plot? And it does.
This Rotom has absolutely no fear, taking an opportunity to get a +4 special attack here, and starting to look really scary out on this field.
Yeah, and the question now is, you know, with Snarl and Spirit Break, if Indeedee doesn't go for Follow Me, then Rotom does basically get back to where it started, takes a little bit of chip damage. So at some point, you have to wonder, does Alejandro say, you know what, I'm just going to max Rotom right now? Because theoretically, you could max Rotom, go for a Helping Hand Max Flare into that Grimmsnarl, eliminate the Grimmsnarl immediately. That also covers for any switches that could go out into the back as well. So I think Alejandro in an interesting spot where, like, you could just go for a max. Interestingly enough, Indeedee is actually going to swap out into Landorus, so not sure that switch needed to happen, just because, I mean, might have existed just to cover for a potential Charizard switch on Yoav's end, but yeah, in the end, the Landorus kind of wastes this Intimidate because you really do want to conserve that for the potential Groudon later on.
Well, we saw in the last game how powerful the Landorus next to the Rotom was. So the Rotom opting to Protect, maybe just trying to get back in the same position in this game to start really putting some pressure on Yoav's end here. Snarl dealing a little bit of chip of damage to this Landorus. Of course, the special attack drop is not going to make a difference. And now that the Landorus is out on the field, it'd be interesting to see what it does, whether Alejandro is like swap that slot every single time, or if he's going to take the opportunity to go for a big max and start putting some pressure on here.
Yeah, I think this definitely feels like a really good opportunity to max. The question is, who do you max? Like, Landorus was the max option last game, so feels like it actually might be this time around as well. Although, I don't know, Max Rotom Key actually looks really, really good against Yoav's team, especially considering all the stages of special attack he got, but looks like Alejandro's committed to Dynamaxing the Landorus. The reason why I think maxing Rotom might be a little bit stronger this time around is because with each overheat, you decrease your special attack by 2 stages, whereas a +2 or +4 Max Flare just does so much damage here. But Yoav, once again, just wanting to ensure to outspeed with this Rotom, goes for that Max Airstream. And yeah, I mean, it's like you mentioned, Sierra. Grimmsnarl often first on the field, the last one out, just because it, you know, is in a really awkward spot after all of these boosts. And let's see if Thunderbolt can actually pick up the knockout here.
It does not. The critical hits were so big in the first game, but unfortunately not getting them in the second game is going to leave that Incineroar out on the field. And now this Grimmsnarl and the Incineroar have the opportunity to be lowering the Rotom's special attack here, trying to bring it back down to more reasonable levels instead of where we've seen it get with all those nasty plots.
That's actually such a critical survival as well, because it buys you an extra turn essentially, right? From Alejandro's end, you've gotten this Rotom set up, you've got the Landorus max. The goal with it typically should be to just try to pick up 3 knockouts in 3 turns, right? But no knockout actually occurs that turn. Now Alejandro had the opportunity to go for something like a Max Quake instead, but opted to get that speed boost instead. Max Quake could have worked out better there, but of course one thing that Alejandro might have been worried about was like a switch out. But that being said, I think Max Quake Thunderbolt might have been a little bit more consistent into that Incineroar slot, and in the end, Alejandro gets punished for yeah, not knocking out the Incineroar, getting a Snarl off, and then just bypassing another turn of Dynamax here from the Landorus T.
At least with that Airstream boost, is going to make sure that this Rotom and Landorus are just outspeeding all the things. Rotom opting to try and get his special attack back up, after it was super lowered last turn. And there will be the Spirit Break from Grimmsnarl. However, with that Airstream into the Incineroar, the Nasty Plot gets to increase 2. The Grimmsnarl only brings it down 1, so leaving the Rotom at a positive here for this turn.
Exactly. So, I mean, the Grimmsnarl's definitely been, you know, pretty good in terms of utility. While it doesn't do that much damage, lowering special attack's really important. Now you can see Yoav's made that adjustment. He's brought out the Porygon too. And now, even though Rotom and Landos are pretty boosted up with Light Screen and Reflect Up, I actually don't think you could knock out Porygon. So Porygon in a position to potentially just go for that Trick Room. Also getting a special attack boost, which is going to be really nice in terms of just Ice Beaming in this late game, right? So I think Trick Room on Porygon definitely the best option here from Yoav's end. Now the question is, do you want to switch out that Grimmsnarl out into Groudon? That could be really risky if Alejandro reads into it, so it might be better to just stay in and keep clicking Spirit Break. But the awkward thing is, if you don't ever make that switch and Alejandro basically targets around the Grimmsnarl, Grimmsnarl's going to be in a really weird spot, right? So you can see Yoav is contemplating switching out into Groudon. It's just that if Alejandro actually reads into this, right, and makes the read like, oh, I'm just going to double up onto the Grimmsnarl slot rather than Porygon, because I don't think I can KO Porygon anyway, and you switch out into Groudon, Groudon faints, the game is just over, it feels like, right? So Yoav has to make the decision here. Do you switch out or do you stay in? And even though he was contemplating the switch, looks like the end decision is going to stay in with Grimmsnarl, and I think that's smart.
And Max Quake from the Landorus coming out and targeting into the Porygon, so it might have been a safe switch there, but sometimes you just have to go with your gut there, and Grimmsnarl staying in ensures that the Groudon does stay healthy in the back. Rotom hitting the Thunderbolt into the Porygon as well, bringing it below half health, but Porygon 2 with that Eviolite is so bulky, it just takes those hits. It doesn't care. The Spirit Break will get another special attack drop, of course, on this Rotom, as the Porygon 2 just sets the Trick Room and sets the rules going forward.
So a much slower paced game this time around by Yoav, and I really like the position that he's put himself into. You know, this Rotom sure is at increased stages of special attack, but man, this Porygon looks so good in this end game. Not only do you have Ice Beam for Landers, but there's also that Eerie Impulse that we were talking about for that Rotom. And so this time around, Yoav is going to go for that switch, but you know, you are at less risk of taking a lot of damage. Once again, though, Alejandro can make a big read here. If you go for the Overheat into the Grimmsnarl as the switch happens and just chunk away Groudon before a Dynamax, that could be absolutely huge. So let's see if Alejandro can play this turn and read into the Groudon switch in this time around.
Definitely going to be a key turn. Alejandro going to just swap out the Landorus, though, back into that Indeedee. Maybe try and keep the Rotom safe going into these Trick Room turns here. All down to the Porygon 2, of course, we saw just going to take the opportunity to recover. So bulky, so difficult to take down, and just having the opportunity to boost its health like way up is just insane.
But the Rotom, not Overheat.
Just the Thunderbolt into the Porygon 2, just getting a little bit of chip down, not going for that Overheat here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point, Alejandro is, you know, still has 4 Pokemon, so he probably doesn't feel the need to make a really big read. I'm not sure Overheat would have knocked out Groudon anyway since the Light Screen is up, but it certainly does a lot of damage, right? Now the thing is, this Groudon can max, can start doing damage, and also get special defense boosts as well. Interestingly enough, actually opting to target the Rotom here with that Groudon, and Indeedee actually makes the switch, so doesn't go for that Follow Me. This Groudon can punish Rotom really heavily for it. Nice play to go for the max Rock Ball there. You know, Alejandro's safest play was probably to just go for a Follow Me and an Overheat there. Instead, it makes that switch, gets Landorus in. And one thing I'm also curious about is kind of the speed dynamic, of course, between this Groudon and the Rotom Heat. But you get the Intimidate off, that's at least a decent start. It's going to be really tough to actually deal damage to this Porygon, though, in the late game, especially because Alejandro's restricted Pokemon is going to be that Calyrex. And so, yeah, if you bring out that Calyrex, I mean, it's not really actually doing that much damage into a Porygon, especially with Eerie Impulse added to the equation.
The Porygon 2, of course, with that recover. The Rotom 2 has a couple of speed boosts from earlier on in the game where the speed control was so pivotal from that Landorus, but now it's just going to be punishing it. This Groudon is going to be able to underspeed, hitting the Rock Ball into the Rotom, and just eliminating it from the field here.
It's a really big turn, and you know, Yoav has played this game so well, realizing that late game Porygon and Groudon under the Light Screen and the Reflect are just such strong options here. So Light Screen finally wears off, but it did exactly what it needed to, and the main thing here is that Yoav's Groudon has not even taken any damage. Alejandro trying to bait a Max Quake into the Indy slot that last turn, and it is actually going to be Glastrier. I do think that is a really, really smart Pokemon choice by Alejandro here that at least puts on pressure against the Groudon, but the reality is that it's still pretty tough, right? Reflect is still up. This Porygon still has that increased stage of special attack as well, and this is an interesting option, contemplating to reverse Yoav's own Trick Room so that you can outspeed Glastrier the subsequent turn. Now, the Groudon is intimidated, right? So you don't do as much damage with it, and this is an open team sheet tournament. I don't think we've actually seen Alejandro's Glastrier yet, but Glastrier does often carry that weakness policy, and so this play makes a lot of sense, right? You don't activate policy, you reverse Trick Room, so then you can outspeed it, and on Alejandro's end, it makes sense to switch out the Landers, because then you can reconserve that Intimidate onto Groudon for later on in this match, but it's definitely been a very different match thus far, and there's an Icicle Spear to start things off.
Icicle Spear with that critical hit, still not dealing too much damage though. The Protect is going to hit though. It's interesting too, as you said, with reversing the Trick Room, but of course Glastrier is one of those Pokemon that just absolutely loves being the slowest thing on the field.
Whoa.
Big Max Quake into it though, bringing it all the way down to the red with it. Yoav's own critical hit here, but will also be hitting into the weakness policy if one.
Yeah, maybe a little bit justice for the critical hits that Alejandro got in that first game. That definitely feels like a really big critical hit, right? Because part of the problem initially for Yoav is how do you actually distribute damage onto Glastrier, especially if you're not using that max rockfall. But now you've done so much damage where the Glastrier is looking like it's in KO range soon enough from an Ice Beam or a rockfall. Maybe not this turn immediately, but that will be enough. And so I like this double up option on the Glastrier as well. It covers for a Landorus switch out, and if it doesn't switch, well, you just get the KO. Indeed, basically forced to follow me here to prevent Glastrier from fainting, but now Porygon 2 looks really, really strong in this end game. Sure, its only offensive attack is Ice Beam, but that alone is so valuable.
There's Max Quake into the Indeedee, doing a sizable amount of damage, but Indeedee taking the hit as this Groudon and Porygon get a special defense boost here. Porygon 2 hitting that Ice Beam, of course. Some damage, but not quite picking up this KO as this Glastrier is just going to opt for another Icicle Spear, just slowly looking to chip down this Groudon and start bringing it to a more reasonable level of health.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Alejandro here, Icicle Spear just gets the minimum 2 hits both times, so not really doing nearly as much damage. And in the end now, Dynamax is over on both ends, but Yoav feels like he's in a much better position. And part of it is just Porygon 2, right? I think one of the reasons why Porygon 2 has been such a staple in the years it's been allowed in VGC is because it's so difficult to knock out and often can just recover all of the damage that it takes back off, right? And so in this case, yeah, there was that burst of damage from the Max Quake and the Thunderbolt that turn, but it wasn't enough to pick up the knockout. All of that basically was negated. And in the end, by putting the attention onto Porygon 2 and actually not being able to pick up the knockout, Porygon 2 basically soaked up a lot of damage and wasn't in much threat, right? So now Trick Room is over because Yoav's reverse state Glastrier is so low. Now you don't have to worry about activating a weakness policy. So really well played by Yoav to play around that weakness policy, not going for a max brawl at any given point, because Yoav recognizes, hey, you know, I have more bulk than you in this endgame and more damage. So as long as I don't increase your damage output, I should be good.
The Indeedee just opting to protect here as the Groudon goes for the Rock Slide, hits into the Protect, and doesn't hit the Glastrier at all. And this Porygon is free though to hit an Ice Beam, and despite not being very effective, does pick up the KO. As you were saying, the Porygon 2 is pretty bulky and is really hard to take out, but as well with that download ability actually can get a nice special attack boost, and it can actually hit with a decent amount of damage as well, especially since Alejandro still has that Landorus on his side here.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely over, and it feels like all off to a decent start at the end, just wasn't able to actually do enough damage, right? Partially, it was the Incineroar hanging out with the sliver of HP. It was a big critical hit onto Glastrier, but quite frankly, I think Yoav was in a winning position already, so he didn't really need it. We've seen a bunch of critical hits throughout the course of the set, but it does feel like the players that got the crits in both games were already ahead in the match, and it just kind of accelerated the battle even more. One thing that I really would have liked to see from Alejandro in this game was actually the Dynamax on the Rotom Heat rather than the Landorus. Yes, Landorus is good. Yes, it can give speed boosts onto the Rotom, but Rotom Heat just does so well at +4 special attack, especially because the sun was up as well. Yes, light screen is up, but it just feels like such a stronger max option there, whereas the Landorus just really didn't do very much, especially when you add Reflect up, you know, into the mix. And so Now just going for Rock Slide, trying to get some flinches. Gets one on both.
Gets two. This ladder is doing whatever it can to try and stay into this match. Of course, it does not appreciate staring down this Porygon 2 in the ground on, but you play to your out, and I mean, the Rock Slide flinches can definitely be an out, even if the damage done is very, very little. Groudon, though, doesn't flinch, opting to just go for that Sword Stance instead, just getting some attack, and the Porygon 2 does get that Trick Room up, so no more flinch hacks from this Landorus here, and this is certainly, it was close to a done game anyways, but this just certainly seals it up.
I will say, you know, these end turns look a little bit trivial, but it's actually critical. You know, Yoav opting to go for the Trick Room instead rather than go for something like...
Excited to get into this game 3.
Let's see which player will advance on. There's so few players left in this bracket, and I really think, yeah, the adjustment, if you're Alejandro, might be to just try to Dynamax that Rotom instead of the Landorus, because Landorus just, at the end of the day, doesn't really cut it in terms of damage. I think one thing, of course, was a big adjustment from Yoav. He brought that Porygon 2, and Alejandro might not have been expecting it, so he did Dynamax the Landorus before there was confirmation of what was in the back for Yoav's end. This time around, you should absolutely expect the Porygon 2, but, you know, with the same leads here, we have a classic scenario where, yeah, last time Groudon protected here, but you can see Yoav saying, I am not going to play this passively anymore. I am just going to go straight for that Swords Dance, and I really like that mix-up. I think these are the adjustments Yoav needed to make between game 2 and 3, and even though it's the same lead, going for a different play this time around I think is strong. My only question now is if Alejandro actually commits a Dynamax on Rotom, can Helping Hand Max Flare knock out Groudon? Maybe not, but it'll still do a lot of damage. Looks like Alejandro just wants to go for that switch once again, and it's going to be Landorus coming in.
Landorus, of course, with that Intimidate, just looking to bring this Groudon down, potentially punishing a possible Protect like last time around, but of course the Sword Stance will be able to get it up later on in the turn. But first, the Grimmsnarl is going to just set up a light screen and Groudon with the Sword Stance, and surely we're going to see a nasty plot from this Rotom as well, as it's no stranger to just taking the opportunity to set up, and there it is, another nasty plot.
Yeah, this time it's interesting though, right? The Groudon is faster than that Rotom Heat. Yes, Landorus can increase your speed by going for a max airstream, but Groudon's looking very, very strong right now. And with that light screen already set up, you can get the Reflect up as well. Even a max Quake and Overheat into Groudon certainly won't knock it out. And so now Alejandro's actually in a really weird spot, right? In that last game, it felt like he managed to get all these boosts onto Rotom, and because Yoav protected on turn 1 with Groudon, Rotom was in a prime position to Dynamax, but it ended up being Landorus maxing. This time around, I mean, I'm not even sure, can Rotom take a +1 max Rockfall from Groudon? That's my first question. And that's if you max the Rotom. If not, it certainly will faint. So Alejandro in a weird spot to consider who to max, because we saw that the max Landorus didn't work out very well last game.
Yeah, just the Landorus is just not really doing enough damage here, but it will be interesting to see, because as the Groudon does outspeed this Rotom here, the speed control is nice, but if you're not doing damage besides that, there's not going to make too much of a difference. But no max coming out on Alejandro's end, opting actually to just protect the little Rotom there and just set up the Reflect on Yoav's end here. So interesting to see what this Landorus is going for, and opts to just go for that U-turn, get out of the match, and just save that Intimidate in the back to just keep cycling it.
I think that's actually a really smart play by Alejandro. He doesn't feel pressure to actually Dynamax, plays a little bit passively, but gets the best possible outcome, because now you get the NDD in that is able to redirect any attacks away from that Groudon. Now, Max Rockfall here is still going to hurt, right? It's going to do a sizable amount of damage with the Protect, but not picking up a KO. But yeah, I mean, 40% of damage, you'll certainly take that if you're Alejandro. And so, or if you're Yoav, I should say. So now what's interesting is that, you know, you still have this +1 Groudon. Alejandro could, of course, switch out the NDD back out into the Landorus, get another Intimidate off that way. Or you could just go for the safe follow me, right? Now from Yoav's end, yeah, Max Rockfall is a more consistent option. You don't really want to Max Quake here, because if you Max Quake and Alejandro actually switches out into Landorus, you lose a turn while getting absolutely nothing. So I think this is a really safe play from Yoav's end. At this point, you've already gotten the screens up. You've gotten the attack boost onto the Groudon, so might as well Rockfall. And there it is, right? Indeed, he switches out. Yeah, you get that Intimidate off, but is that really worth it? Because Rotom is such a pivotal Pokemon, and you're not protecting it right now, and so it's going to eat up such a big Max Rockfall. It's going to be a neutral attack Max Rockfall, basically.
Especially this Intimidate is not bringing the Groudon down like negative, it's just reversing what that Sword Stance was able to hit up. So this Groudon is very much strong still, and will be able to make a big hit into this Rotom here. So interesting to see. This as Rotom does not appreciate that and just gets taken right out. Alejandro with the constant Intimidate cycling in that slot gets punished for it as well, as that Rotom was left vulnerable.
Yeah, and I mean, Rotom Heat feels like the main win condition in this set, right? So for it to just faint without doing any damage is such a good thing for Yoav and such a poor thing for Alejandro, right? So gambling a little bit, but you know, Yoav I think really making the safest plays these last couple of turns. Alejandro had some safer options, for example, follow me in that position. Now Glastrier is going to come out, and at this point I think Yoav really doesn't want to activate the weakness policy on the Glastrier. I think Glastrier actually might be the best Dynamax candidate at this point from Yoav's end, but the reality is, like, Glastrier without its weakness policy activated doesn't actually do that much damage, and it can't really snowball very quickly right now either, especially without Trick Room being up. So yeah, because Rotom went down and didn't max, I think now you're forced to max like the Glastrier here. Landers of course could max, but it just does way too little damage, I think, to justify maxing it here.
We will see Alejandro go ahead and go forward with this max shear, and it is going to be the Glastrier, which is, I think, the first time from Alejandro at all that we've seen it max at all, which Glastrier, I mean, is such a strong Pokemon, so it'll be interesting to see how it fares up against these. Landorus is just going to go for that U-turn, bringing this Indeedee back out here, just looking to keep Intimidate cycling in that slot, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe I saw the ground go for a Max Quick into that slot.
Yeah, which is a really nice play there. I mean, makes a lot of sense. You're covering for that U-turn, but you know, Max Rockfall feels a little bit safer typically there, and yeah, reads into that U-turn, gets a lot more damage onto the Indeedee, and that really feels like a potentially game-winning play because Yoav's already ahead in the game. You know, Landers have, like, you would assume is going to switch out there because he doesn't want to take this double up. But the reason why this is such a smart play is because you've covered all of your bases, right? If Landers stays in, sure, Max Quick doesn't go off. You don't really need that special defense boost at this point. You still get an Ice Beam, which is 4 times super effective into the Landers. And if Landers switches out, well, then the Indeedee just faints. So really safe and smart option by Yoav. I feel like Yoav's game plan in this game has just been playing consistent, going for the safest option each turn. Turn 1 was a little bit scary, of course, because of the Rotom and the Indeedee putting on pressure, but after turn 1, Yoav was just making his safest options, and Alejandro has given up a lot and not really gained enough in return. So yeah, Glastrier is looking strong. Yeah, you get a special defense boost, but how valuable is a special defense boost right now, right? Opting to go for a Max Quake rather than a Max Hailstorm, trying to fish for maybe a switch out into the Incineroar, for example, on Yoav's end. And so Alejandro recognizing I'm already behind, maybe I need to make some really big predictions. If you can crit an Incineroar on a switch in, yeah, that maybe keeps you into it. But at this point, the game is looking really, really good for Yoav. Has barely taken any damage. You know, Alejandro was forced to Dynamax the Glastrier. That really feels like the worst max option in this set, relative to something like Landers and Rotom. So Yoav just dealt with that Rotom really, really well, and Alejandro just gave it up way too quickly.
Yeah, the Intimidate cycling in that one slot, just really punishing him as that Rotom was left vulnerable too. I would have loved to see him protected a little bit more. I mean, we've seen in previous matches how powerful that Follow Me is next to that Rotom, keeping it safe, letting Nasty Plot up and be able to deal big damage, but the Rotom Nasty Plotted all by itself and met really demise there. We will see the Groudon swap back out here, so regardless, all that Intimidate cycling that happened is not going to be for anything, as the Incineroar also gets that Intimidate off on this Landorus and the Glastrier, with Alejandro down 2 Pokemon and no opportunity to swap them out.
Yeah, and so, Rock Slide does so little damage, and Intimidate in these end games always, just makes it nearly impossible to win, because it basically saying you need to crit like everything, and Ice Beam actually, despite the Assault Vest, just manages to pick up the KO anyway. So that's why that Ice Beam and Max Quick play was really safe. It wasn't like a hard prediction or anything. It just covers for either option like it happened right now. So it's now down to Glastrier against the world, but this Glastrier hasn't been able to get any meaningful boosts. Yeah, yes, it has an attack boost that negates the Intimidate. Yes, it has a special defense boost, but there's only 1 turn of Max left, and Yoav could so easily just pivot the Incineroar out and back in. Porygon can recover infinitely. So in the end, there was just very little damage distribution, and Yoav coming up with a really good game plan, adjusting so well after that first match.
Especially losing the Rotom so early. None of the other Pokemon were really good against the four that Yoav was bringing here. So like you said, another turn of Max, but with Yoav with 4 healthy Pokemon and infinite ways to deal with this Glastrier, it seems this Glastier's really gonna have to do something big and some bold moves being made to try and for Alejandro to try and claw his way back into this at any means.
Yeah, definitely. But kudos to both players. I mean, this was a set full of adjustments, right? The Calyrex, the Glastrier coming out over the Calyrex here. Ultimately, I think Alejandro's team just doesn't do enough damage outside of Rotom Heat, especially when you consider, Intimidate's coming out as a factor. That means Landorus and Glastrier are just significantly worse Dynamax options. Now, one thing Alejandro could have maybe changed in this game was actually bringing out the Calyrex Shadow Rider, but can definitely understand his hesitance to not play towards that just because there are multiple Dark-type Pokemon in Yoav's team, and you just don't do much damage to either of those, especially Incineroar. So, yeah, Glastrier is going to try its best at this point, but there's really no way out of it, to be honest. And you would need to crit everything, even with crits on everything. Like, I just think you're too far behind right now. So Yoav making the absolute right adjustment to bring that Porygon 2 in games 2 and 3. And I do really feel like Alejandro had an opportunity in game 2 to Dynamax that Rotom rather than the Landorus and just push the tempo with a Rotom at +4 special attack under the sun. But by Dynamaxing Landorus, Alejandro was just not able to do enough damage. Yoav stalled it out pretty well. And then this game 3 felt like just a really dominant win by Yoav, where Alejandro didn't really go for his safest options and gave up what was really the primary way of dealing with all of Yoav's team in that Rotom Heat.
Oh, definitely. And then Yoav here just doing some chip into this Glacier, but I mean, a little bit of chip every turn is literally all that he needs here. The high horsepower will come out from the Glacier to the Grimmsnarl. Picks up that KO, but I mean, Yoav at this point is not going to mind the Grimmsnarl going down at all. The Grimmsnarl came out, got a little bit of chip, and now you get a free switch into that Incineroar for another Intimidate, or just into the Groudon to deal some good damage into the Glacier. So we will see the Incineroar come back out, and this little horse against the world is probably not going to be making it here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Alejandro's still playing it out because you could hope for Yoav to make a really big mistake, I don't know, activate your own weakness policy, but you can see Yoav just playing it as safe as possible, going for that fake out, going for that switch out. You just get a little bit more of chip damage onto the Glacier. Porygon's not really doing very much with Ice Beam right now. So Alejandro, still playing to his outs because one way, I guess you could theoretically win the game is if Yoav, misses all the attacks with Groudon, you activate the weakness policy on the Glacier, and Glacier actually manages to pick up a KO, because it does have good type coverage here. The problem is just it's not nearly enough through Reflect and the Intimidate, and so, Yoav also just playing this as smartly as possible, not wanting to give Alejandro any chance of coming out. But now, you've set up the Sun, you get that Flare Blitz, now you don't have to worry about activating a weakness policy, because Flare Blitz alone should just pick up the KO. If not, Rock Slide certainly will finish it off, and there's Rock Slide connecting to start things off.
Yeah, Rock Slide bringing it right back down to nothing. Of course, the weakness policy that could not in this case, as this Incineroar is going to hit the Flare Blitz into it and take this 2-1 for Yoav, who will be moving on to the next round here.
That was a really fun set to watch, and credits to both players, and congratulations to Alejandro for a really incredible run throughout this tournament. This was not, an easy matchup by any means. Yes, the Rotom Heat looks really good on paper, but the reality is that the rest of the team just doesn't do very much damage, and this is why screens